As you approach the gaming table, the figure of a monster takes shape. A beast that feeds on the bones of player agency, with a stable of unhelpful NPCs chiming in with every plot point. You've heard this player called a Choo Choo Charli, a Railroad Ralph, but you know that the creature before you is a Railroad DM. What do you do?
I use Charm Monster.
Invariably, there's some sort of figurative monster rearing its ugly head in our tabletop games. It's rare that we can slay these beasts outright, so instead, we use Charm Monster.
So this is the segment of Charm Monster where we're going to talk about another hot topic. Well, it's not a hot topic. It's just something that...
Spencer's gifts in the mall.
It's a Spencer's gift topic. It's a Bob Marley shirt with the sleeves are a little too small on it, and you don't find that out until you wash it the first time. But you wear it because it's cool enough.
Yeah.
Timeless. And all of that is just our analogy to say this is the portion of the show we're going to talk about railroading in tabletop RPGs. As usual, I'm going to throw it to you first. I don't even know how to start this because I think I'm going to just let you say. What do you think about railroading?
Okay, well, I personally feel that there are two types of railroading, and I believe this is why it's so hotly contested. Number one, which is the simple kind that most people don't like, is not allowing your players to do things because you had something else in mind. A good example of this is, so your plan as the GM is to let the villain get away. And, you can fudge rolls all day, and you can, do this and that, give him a bunch of hit points, but as soon as your players find a way to, say, entangle him or tackle him or grapple him to the ground, it's going to seem really unfair that somehow almost magically, or, he rolls so many good rolls and runs away. Your players are going to feel cheated because, well, he had to get away, is what it sounds like. They're going to quickly realize that, oh, we can't actually do anything to this guy, seemingly because he's a part of your story.
Right.
Now, that's a very simple example, but there is a second type of railroading that some people call railroading that I don't think is railroading. But that we'll get into that. The idea being that, so you have 3 encounters planned, and the general example here is that you're in a forest. Your players are in a forest, and you have 3 encounters planned, and the idea is basically that no matter what, they're going to encounter those 3 things. So, they're running through the forest, and they're looking for someone, and they come upon a group of goblins. That's one of the encounters. Now, they came across the goblins because they turned left, but had they turned right, they would have come across a group of bugbears. But the idea is that when they finish with the goblins, the next thing they're going to run into is the bugbears, or vice versa. No matter what, they're going to fight goblins, and they're going to fight bugbears. And some people think that that is railroading, because you're not letting the game play out. But I don't think that's railroading because those are the encounters you have planned. That's, part of the story. Now, what the players do inside of that is whatever they want. They could run away from the bugbears if they want. I think railroading would be if you forced them to fight someone. Something like that.
Right. And I agree with that. I think this is the way that I see it. When I'm going to DM or GM for you, we're entering a social contract that I'm going to prepare something that I think that you're going to enjoy. Here is where railroading comes into play. I am not to prepare a story. Okay? I have to build this statted out Rube Goldberg machine, and you get to choose what you trigger. So I put, and the encounters is what you're talking about. I build these encounters, these standalone spheres, if you will, that I put a bunch of ingredients in. But where it's your choice is, what do you do with the ingredients? I love presenting players with a scenario for each encounter, and then letting them do what they want with the scenario. So that's the social contract you're entering in when you play a game with me, is I'm going to put together pieces that I want you to experience, but I don't have, and this is the key, I don't have an end in mind. And the encounters can't inform one another in only one way. Meaning, I can't say, okay, in your example, when you kill the goblins, the bugbears do this. Because what if you don't kill the goblins?
And that is, I think that is even a little less, a good way to avoid railroading is not assuming that the players will do something. And in some cases, it's as simple as if they come across goblins, they'll probably fight them. But again, you cannot say that,
But maybe not.
Exactly. They might run away, or they might, try to capture the goblins, or they might, if the fact that, if something the players do is integral to the story, it's very dangerous. And that's where I think some GMs fall into the trap of railroading. Some maybe don't know any better, but the most important thing, and I think the most fun about running a game, is seeing what your players do and building off of that. So like you said, you have the ingredients and say a rough framework of what you want to happen, and you know the NPCs, and you know the area, and you know what everyone's motivations are, and you see what the players do with that. And by not constricting them, or by not coming up with a story, if A, then B kind of thing, it's a little harder to plot out exactly what's going to happen, but that's not the point. You're not telling a really well nuanced story with, this and that and love and regret. It's like, well, no, you're telling whatever story the PCs decide you're telling, or decide to allow you to tell, but you were able to put the pieces in place that allow them to do so.
That's it. And for me, I do, and I'm going to take this a step even further than just what I do. There is some level of railroading in almost every tabletop RPG session.
Absolutely.
Because you have to have a certain amount prepared. And unless you choose to do an improv game.
Exactly.
Which is a totally different style. It can be super fun. It can be some of the best sessions you've ever had. But to work within the frame of whatever system you're playing, and to me, to really take advantage of different rule sets and numbers and how the balance works and those kinds of things, I have to have some of my ducks in a row so that on paper, your mechanics line up with my mechanics.
Yeah.
And if we don't do that, I might be able to fake it really well, but I want to give each player somewhat of an opportunity to play their character. Not just role play, but if they have something on the sheet, I want to give a sorcerer an opportunity to be a sorcerer.
Exactly.
That's just my GM style.
Yeah.
So there's some degree of railroading in every single game. But let me ask you, when is the line? What is it that makes it the bad kind of railroading? And we kind of talked about this a little bit, but in your example there, you've got goblins, you've got bugbears. Is that bad? Because there's a segment of players that believe you should have it mapped out, and wherever the players go, they could feasibly, by luck, sheer blind luck, walk a clear path, never hitting a conflict or an encounter, and get to the end.
And that, to me, like you said, there is a segment of people that believe that, but because when I play an RPG, it is to tell a story, conflict is going to find you. Just like in a movie, conflict finds the main characters, and if it didn't, there wouldn't be a movie. I feel the same way.
Or a good movie.
Exactly. I feel the same way about role-playing games, where if you don't run into whatever it is I need you to run into, then it doesn't make sense. You suspend your disbelief that certain things happen. Another example, and another thing that some people may consider role-playing, but I consider not role-playing, that some people may consider railroading, and a good way to really start an adventure off with a bang and get things going without starting in the tavern every time, is telling your players where they are. So you say, okay, you've been captured by somebody. And this works especially good for one-shots. You have to do a little more setup when it's a campaign, but you can say, okay, you've been captured by somebody, you're in prison, what do you do? And somebody says, okay, I look for some sort of implement to pick the lock. And you didn't necessarily place something in the room, but you can say, okay, well, there is, this in the room, and you might be able to fashion it, give me a roll. And it's the kind of thing where You've put them in a situation, and you see how they react to it. Again, you didn't map out everything that's, say, in this prison cell, but it can be assumed that, okay, well, there might be something you can use. You know, there might be something that with enough, if you're clever enough, you can use to pick the lock, or you can use to distract the guard, or it's all up to what they want. But all I have, as a GM, have planned out is there's a prison, they're in a cell, and there's a guard there. And you put forth some sort of goal, in this case, getting out of prison.
Right.
Now, I don't think that's railroading them, but you did make sure that they were in prison. You gave them no chance to get out. But you didn't do it within the confines of the game. You did it within the confines of the social contract, saying, players, you've got to trust me, this is where you're starting.
Right. No, I agree with that. And it's funny how it's quickly accepted in Skyrim. You start off, you're a prisoner on a cart, you're basically on a wagon that's going to the execution site.
Exactly.
You have to start somewhere. And it's funny because some of my older games, when I was learning to DM and really figuring out the process, my biggest mistake to derail a session early was to start out by asking all the players, okay, what are you doing? As silly as that sounds, unless I gave them a framework and I just, like you said, put them in a place, had them in some sort of motion.
Exactly. Some situation.
Correct. You know where I learned it from? As silly as it sounds, it was not but a few years ago. I was listening to the Acquisitions Incorporated stuff with Chris Perkins, and one of the sessions, he told them where they were. He said, you're in a meeting with all the masked lords of Waterdeep. Here's what you're doing. You two, you're watching a puppet show in the city square. You're here. What do you do?
Exactly.
So he painted them a circle, so to speak, to fill in. Like, okay, here's where you're at. What do you do?
Yeah, it's that back and forth between the GM and the players, and that's what makes it fun. Because going one way, saying, hey, you can do anything, what do you do? It can meander on and not really mean much. But the other way, saying, hey, this is exactly what happened, and you're stuck there. You know, even my prison example is some players in a campaign might feel that's unfair if you've done a few sessions and between sessions they get captured for some reason. That's like, okay, that's pushing a little bit.
Right.
But somewhere between, they're like, hey, you're in the city center and something is happening. What do you do? And then it's very likely that, I believe in that same game, an NPC contacted them or met them or was talking to them in the middle of the puppet show, but not until it had gone on for a little bit and the players had a chance to play out what they might be doing. So the idea is, again, you plan events and you try to fit them in where they go, and sometimes the players will avoid them. Sometimes as a DM, you'll have an idea of what you think you want to happen.
And most of the time it won't.
Exactly. One of my favorite examples, and you'll have to remind me if I'm telling this correctly, is in the Provokers game that Matt Click GMs that you play in. At one point, he had the players on a falling elevator. And he told them afterward, you know, okay, so there's a falling elevator. This elevator begins to drop. They get ambushed by enemies. They're fighting. All of this really cool stuff is going on. Really awesome encounter. And after the session, Matt Click tells them, I expected you guys to jump out of the elevator. I didn't expect you to ride it all the way down to the bottom.
Right.
And the idea is he didn't know, but because he put forth a situation, in the same way the players reacted however they wanted, Matt knew roughly what he wanted to happen as far as they're in an elevator, somebody's attacking them, what next? It's the kind of thing where he didn't know what next, but you have a good enough framework that it's not sheer improv of like, oh, okay, well now I have to come up with a whole adventure because they went left instead of right. It's more like, oh, okay, well what happens logically based on what I thought would happen?
Right, and that's, to me, and I want to go back and kind of figure out what is it in the example you used. If I'm playing in a campaign, we finish one session, then the next session, you tell me we've been captured. Why is that unfair? Why is it okay to start captured, but why is it unfair? And I have an answer that I think it is, and I'm going to answer first, and then I'm going to throw it to you. It's because you've taken away my ability to react. You've taken away my ability to cause consequences.
Exactly.
It's my choice if I want to. What if I didn't want to be a prisoner? What if my character's background is they will never be captured again and they would sooner die? You're not allowed to impose consequences on me unless, in my opinion, That's the difference.
Exactly.
You can't tell me the order in which things happen, and you can't tell... It's a story that we're telling together.
Yeah.
So don't take away my ability to have consequence and to cause consequences.
Exactly. And in the same way, on the opposite end, I feel like as in the same way that the GM can, railroad you and take away your ability to cause something to happen, sometimes players may do that to the GM. In some cases, players may, they say, well, I want to do this, and they don't like that the GM will tell them no for a good reason. I guess this is getting a little off topic, but the idea is it can go the other way, because in some cases, players say, I want to do this, and the GM either says no, or, well, you can do maybe this, but that's a little, outside the realm of possibility.
Right.
So I guess what I'm getting at is sometimes it can feel unfair and not be unfair, but everybody has to agree on what that means to them.
That's true.
So, but to answer your question, which the idea is you're not able to capture them, say, between sessions without them being able to do something, but you can, as a GM, say, okay, I want the guards to rush in, and I want them to try to capture them. Now, your players have a few choices, because these are the city guard. Now, it depends on why. Maybe it's an evil city. We're going to go ahead and say that, okay, this is a good city, and the guards have some reason to believe that the adventurers have done something bad. Now, the adventurers may have their own idea of what happened. Maybe they were framed for a murder somehow. Maybe they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe somebody, that's corrupt framed them or put them at a place. So basically, they're being arrested. Now, they have a few options. Like you said, if your player would sooner die than go to prison, they might, well, fight back. But it might create a very interesting role-play encounter because the other people in their party are trying to explain to this person, maybe you should rethink that because we need to get ourselves out of this, without shedding the blood of these guards, and it's not their fault. It's
right.
The kind of thing where that creates a really interesting situation. That's what makes that fun is, okay, try to capture the PCs and see what they do. You can control everything the guards do, but maybe they get away. Maybe they bluff the guards into thinking they're not them.
Exactly.
And then in the coming, rest of the session or the next session, you can decide, you have the whole time between sessions to say, okay, well, I planned on them going to jail, but now what are they going to do? Are they going to go turn themselves in and throw themselves on the mercy of the court or whoever it is? What are they going to do next, And that's what makes it fun versus saying the guards come in and they capture you, that's it.
Right. And I agree with everything you're saying because to me, the bad kind of railroading is the kind of railroading that already has the answer.
Exactly.
So, like, for me, when I plan an adventure or an encounter or whatever it is, I'm setting up a little obstacle course. And I'm making a couple ways out. Maybe this could happen. Maybe that could happen. The players always surprise me.
Always.
So I think, oh, okay, well, if I were there, maybe this will happen. So then I have to prep for this and always surprise me. So here's what I do. I set up an obstacle course. So I'm railroading you in the sense that, okay, we just ran a Copper Jackals one-shot. And the Copper Jackals are like our special forces, like quick kind of action-packed encounters that we run on our channel. I needed them to find a door. And they were on this enormous stone golem. One of them was going to find the door. And I hadn't decided who yet. I was waiting for it to play out to see who was going to be closest to the door. Some gamers would be really upset by that.
Exactly.
They would say it's unfair and it's so on, but I did it in my viewpoint for what was best for the story.
Yeah.
But I still gave them the opportunity to react to the door the way that they would react to it.
Exactly. It's all for the narrative. Again, in the same way that it seems pretty ridiculous that the main character of a movie keeps finding himself in these crazy situations.
Right.
But that's the point. It's like if the main character of the movie didn't have that last bullet to shoot the villain, it's like, oh, well, that would have been very anticlimactic.
Right.
And somebody could easily say, well, yeah, he used all his bullets. That's what happens. Sorry, that's the way it goes. And I'm like, well, no. There is a measure of, player agency and being able to, have a free will, but somebody's got to find the door for this encounter to keep going. So the door's got to pop up where somebody is. You're not going to spend 20 minutes like, oh, well, you haven't found it yet, so you better keep rolling or you better keep looking.
Well, and that's, for me, it's funny, you mentioned player agency, meaning, okay, the player's ability to have that free will and that choice and do whatever they want. I think the reverse is also true. I think you need to have DM or GM agency. If this is truly a collaborative story, and yes, I'm the one who's kind of setting the standard as far as what's allowed and different things, I need to be able to do the same thing you are, which is use my imagination. I have to be able to be responsive to your play style that night. The quiet guy might get loud that night. The loud guy might be tired and be quiet. And if I have a set adventure in my head that's exactly a certain way, I don't have fun running it if it doesn't match the tone of the night.
Exactly.
So I need to have DM agency. So the bad kind of railroading, if you took what, to me, the core of tabletop RPGs really is, which is asking what if. All right, what if the guards come in and they're, controlled by mind flayers?
Exactly. All what ifs and no, this is what happens.
Well, it's, to me, yes, it's all what ifs, but then you have the answer already.
Exactly.
A good mix is you throw it out there and go, hey, what if? And then you let the players answer that question.
Yeah.
But you have to come up with the what if. And you have to let them answer. Now, you can do some yes, but, yes, and in the middle of their answer, but you shouldn't have an answer.
Exactly. And again, you can have a rough idea and base that on what the players do, and they'll never know. If okay, they have to find this item. That doesn't mean you have to put it in one place for them to find it, but Agreed. It means that if the amulet is supposed to be in this room and they've done everything else they need to do, if they don't roll high enough on their, perception check, it's not like, oh, well, they didn't find the amulet. It's the kind of thing where somebody might say, oh, I searched for it here, or if nobody decides to search, then, you can just as easily say, you see an amulet hanging on the wall. Like, again, it's not so much about... It always seems to come back down to some people that feel that role-playing games should be to win, which in the case of my Dungeons & Dragons games, it's not about winning. It's about having a good time and storytelling. And that winning would be tainted by being able to make up the rules, being able to say, no matter what, this is going to happen, by doing the what if, by saying, well, again, in the case of, like, you have to find something, like you have to find a clue. Well, they have to find the clue or the game doesn't continue, so put it where they look. And that's a small example, but again, it will always, to me, come back to movies and television shows. The main character is going to find the clue. That's the point. That's the idea. That's what puts you're not there for, I wonder if they'll find the clue. You're there for, I wonder how they'll find the clue. I wonder how they'll use that to make the next scene really awesome.
Right. And then there's also smaller degrees of success and failure.
Exactly.
So they find the clue, but they smudge it and it's half readable. So it's not as easy as if they had found it by thinking a little smarter.
Exactly.
Or maybe they don't find the clue right away, so someone else is murdered.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they're like, oh, they stumble upon it. Or, there's consequences that can come, but it's funny that, again, I know there would be some people out there that would think, well, what do you mean? That would cheapen the whole thing. If you just told me the amulet was hanging on the wall, it's like, yeah, but wouldn't it slow down the pace? And the idea of the game is to have this cool story that we're telling. And if it would just treadmill right there of, okay, still in this room, can I roll again for... It's like, that to me is not fun.
Exactly.
Because the players then are like, well, now you're really talking about going to the opposite of railroading, which is a sandbox. Then you have the guy that's like, well, I'm going to the tavern, and I'm going to drink.
Yeah, and it's like...
Which is fine.
Yeah. But so, again, in these same people that might feel like that cheapens it, again, you have to consider, well, why would it cheapen it? If you dig deeper into, well, what do you mean cheapen it? It made it more fun. That does the opposite of cheapening it for me. Now, if this were a game with set rules that were very important, say in a board game, yeah, it cheapens it. We call that cheating, when we're against each other. When one person is working to win, or even if you're playing cooperatively to do something and you fudge something, no, now you're working outside the rules. And it cheapens it because, yeah, we won, but you did, you took that extra card that one time, and, the whole thing feels a little less awesome because, maybe we won by one card, and it's hard not to feel like that's why. But in a role-playing game, I'm winning if I'm having a good time, even if my character is dying.
Right, especially
if my character is in the greatest peril. And I'm doing my best to get him or her out of it, and trying to just have a good time. That's me winning. So it's only cheapened if I'm not having fun. Right. And I'm not having fun if you're a GM that has the answer to the question, what if, already, because that takes away, me being able to roleplay. But in the same respect, if you allow me to do anything, I want some sort of guidelines. I want to have a good time. So if you're like, well, you can go anywhere in town, but you as the GM know that, well, in this particular market stall, there's a gypsy that gives them a side quest. Well, if I don't know that, I'm never going to say, well, what stores can I go to? Oh, I want to go talk to the gypsy. I wonder if she needs us to do anything. I'm like, no. You gotta feed me to some degree.
Right. And that's a good DM or GM railroads seamlessly, but not entirely. It's just little nudges. It's little drawing in the lines. It's, in fact, there are a couple of phrases here that if you hear these things, you're probably being railroaded. So your character remembers something. It's like, oh, does he? Yeah. He remembers. Remember the NPC from the beginning with the glass eye? And it's like, oh, you want me to go find that guy? No. Your character remembers that guy. What do you do? Another one is, you suddenly notice the amulet hanging on the wall, which is kind of like, I would give them a shot first for a little while before I'm like, oh, you move some things.
Exactly.
There's got to be...
Well, okay, going back to the gypsy example, okay, so if you say, what do you want to do? And that's the end, and I'm like, well, I don't know, I guess maybe I'll go try to get my armor fixed. I don't know. But if you say, you find yourself, on the middle of a busy street, there are a few market stalls, there's somebody selling armor, there's somebody selling potions, but there's one person, a very interesting looking gypsy woman, and she's staring at you. What do? I'm like, now I can fix my armor, buy potions, and potentially talk to this woman that's staring at me. And I'm like, well, you might have really wanted me to talk to her, but if I don't, it's up to you to make the armor maker tell me about how somebody was talking about me. Tell me about how maybe there's, a plot hook, more or less. It's like, basically, I can get something from anywhere, but if you have an idea of like, oh, well, as a player, I'm talking to this gypsy. I'm walking right over to her, and I want to know what she's got to say. But if I don't, life goes on.
Right. Now, and we'll kind of wrap up with this, which is, I have a way that I do both of those things you just said. And it's like this. It's sort of this, and again, a lot of people might disagree with this, but I'm telling you it works. Give this a shot. As long as you're fair and you let things play out, even if it's uncomfortable for you or not what you planned, this works well. So here's what you do. I have a side quest. We've talked about, the gypsy having it. Well, what if I have this side quest? And the side quest is, I need to have you go and speak with a specific official in town. Just say that. As a DM or GM, what I can do is I can throw it to you and say, okay, you have a couple hours in town before you have to leave for the adventure. What would your character do in town? And throw me something back. What would your character do in town?
So I would say, all right, so I'm the fighter, and I want to get a little role play in here. So I would say, okay, I'm going to go and I want to, sharpen my blade. I want to see if there's any interesting weapons maybe that the blacksmith might have. And again, in this case, I'm assuming there's a blacksmith, and you can take that and do what you want with it.
Sure. So we'll say that I didn't have a blacksmith prepared, specifically. But I look at my chart, have some NPC names and so on, and even for a little flavor, I'd say, okay, so you go to the blacksmith stall, and you actually see the normal blacksmith that would be there is not there. It's like you see perhaps the name is like Brahms, shop of armor smithy. But you see perhaps there's a woman there. Now, maybe it's Brahms' apprentice. But She notices you. You kind of go through, and I would role play an interaction of maybe she's got a chip on her shoulder. Maybe she makes a comment about how Brahm's drunk all the time, not here anymore, whatever. All that's the role play. The point is, I don't necessarily need you to talk to a gypsy to get the same side quest.
Exactly.
I let you pick. I let you choose what NPC, what you're doing. I have a piece of information I need to feed you. You get to choose the platter, the drink on the side, the sides, the fork. I just go, okay, here's the steak. The steak can be anywhere. And that's how I kind of do a blend of both. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that's the important part is while some people might not like that, if I don't get the steak, I'm upset. So if I don't happen to talk to the right person to get my steak and the drink I want on the side, the game to me is completely moot.
And let me just destroy this analogy and keep running it into the ground. As a DM, I have specifically prepared a steak for your character. Meaning, coming out of analogy land, I have prepped something for James's character that I think would be cool. If you just don't ever find that, why, number one, would I take my time to prepare that during my life that's busy in real life? And then number two, you never enjoy the fruits of that. So it's like, I know you as a player, you know me as a DM. Why make it possible that I spend time on something that you'll never, ever, ever know about?
Exactly.
That doesn't make sense to me.
And so I feel in the same way that when you go to a film and you suspend your disbelief about people traveling at the speed of light, when you sit down around a table to play a role-playing game, as a player, you know to some degree that this is all orchestrated. And that's the point. If it weren't orchestrated, it would be potentially like a sandbox where anything can happen, but nothing would be as good as a steak. A good analogy I've heard about sandbox games versus scripted games is, yeah, sandboxes are cool, but the problem is you get to eat your dessert first. And that's not always a good thing.
I like it. Especially since it ties in with the food analogy.
Yeah.
So we'll throw it to you, listeners. What do you think? What are your thoughts on railroading? Are we right? Are we wrong? Are we missing something in between? This is how we play. This is what makes it fun for us. Send any emails to charmmonster@tabletopterrors.com. And that's CharmMonster. So there are two M's. charmmonster@tabletopterrors.com. Let us know. What do you think about railroading? We are Tabletop Terrors. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Charm Monster, and we'll see you next week.